is up to 9%. Wages are increasing even faster at 14%. There's a huge balance of payments deficit, placing the pound under increasing pressure. Unemployment has risen for the first time up to 1 million. Remember, full employment was a key objective of the post-war economic settlement. Government expenditure had risen a great deal to try and deal with all of these issues, and industrial relations had crumbled, and 70 million days have been lost to strikes between 1970 and 1974. And the key part of that was the trade unions' revolt against the incomes policy, which was the government's attempt to restrict wages to public sector workers in nationalised industries in order to try and keep inflation down. Okay, the idea was this was going to help reduce inflation. Now, the National Union of Miners said there's no way this is going to happen. We're not going to have the private sector being able to do any type of wage increase they want, but the public sector be the ones who take that hit. And in 1972 and 1974, they begin the 3-day week, where literally they only mine coal 3 days a week. This is during the winter, both years, so the coal supplies rapidly diminish. And so while I was growing up in 1972 and 1974, we lived under frequent power cuts, because literally Britain ran out of coal to power its power stations. Okay, so I was doing my homework under candlelight, okay, in a supposedly first world country. Now, in February 1974, Heath does a very foolish thing, which is he holds an election under the slogan, "Who governs?" Is it the elected members of Parliament, or is it the trade union movement? Who runs this country? That was his question to the electorate, and they told him quite firmly that it was not Edward Heath, and he lost the election, bringing in Harold Wilson, who had, of course, had his first term between 1964 and 1970. So in February, Heath loses the election to Wilson. Wilson then doesn't get a big majority, doesn't get barely a majority again. So 6 months later, he holds another election in the hope of trying to get a significant majority of MPs in the House that he would be actually able to do something, and that fails. Fewer people turn out to vote, and the percentage of the Labour vote falls at 2%. So politically, Wilson is left in a very attenuated position. He tries to do various things, which tries to scrap the incomes policy, and then he starts it again, and it's all a disaster. By 1976, he resigns, and unemployment is at 1 million. The balance of payments has reduced to only 1 billion, but inflation has risen a little to 16%. So in many ways, Wilson, did calm things down after the Heath administration, but he's out. Now things get serious. Okay, sorry, I know I'm going fast, but I've got to get through this. James Callaghan comes in to replace Wilson. And in March, actually Wilson resigns on my sister's birthday on the 16th of March. Callaghan comes in. He faces an absolute disaster era, because a month after he takes over from Wilson, the Wall Street Journal runs an article called Goodbye Britain, which basically says, look, Britain's in such a mess, there's going to be a run on the pound and the currency is going to collapse. They've got to get their public expenditure under control. So the financial markets in this new deregulated currency system is putting huge pressure upon the nationally elected government. And then along comes the US and says, look, you can't do this. We need you to be, our person in Europe, in the EEC and in NATO. And if the pound goes belly up and your economy tanks, then you're not going to be able to play that role. Britain is therefore a Labour government a putatively socialist Labour government, and this is going to have a lot of contemporary echoes, therefore has to take a loan under American pressure from the IMF. Okay? And this is the beginning of the so-called structural adjustment program that the IMF and the World Bank did in spades throughout the 70s and the 90s on all developing economies, that said, okay, in return for our loan, you've got to decimate public expenditure. Okay, so a Labour administration has to take this loan and it has to then reduce public expenditure by 20%, which it does, and which is politically, of course, a complete disaster, both because unemployment rises up to 1.4 and because the public service unions go on a big strike in the winter of 1978 and 1979. Massive amounts of strikes across, but critically, all the public service workers. So, people like no ambulance drivers, no policemen, no firemen, no trains, no grave diggers. Okay? So the entire country seems to disintegrate, as this news report should show you, if it works. How very annoying. Okay, it's not going to work. Basically all it is a clip of the piles of rubbish piling up in Trafalgar Square and in all the big public parks. Problem with rats, and the piling up of dead bodies in mortuaries because the grave diggers weren't digging the graves, so all the mortuaries became full. Needless to say, this winter of discontent, as it became known, became emblematic of a country that was going down the tube, and it was politically used very, very skillfully by Mrs. Thatcher and the Conservative Party, and it's no coincidence that she's elected in the spring of 1979. Phew. So two main points I want you to get. Okay, one is that so-called neoliberal economics projects of economic liberalization begin both intellectually and politically in the 1970s. Okay, they're not something that's simply a kid. Or certainly, we can say that the 1970s is the time when the old Keynesian system of economic management collapsed. Secondly, I want you to get a sense of the political chaos of this period of time. Whole series of elections, no government seeming to be able to resolve the crisis or to control the labour movement. It seemed like the labour movement was, as the Conservatives were saying, holding the country to ransom. Okay? And yet I want to emphasise this sense of an impending crisis was in many ways exaggerated, because in terms of the conventional measures of how well governments worked in terms of the delivery of prosperity and the delivery of jobs and the avoidal of unemployment, it looked a whole lot better in the 1970s than it was going to look in the 1980s and the 1990s. Now, having done that at rapid, quick speed, I can now breathe. If you have any questions about any of those sections of the lecture, you may go. I've talked you into submission. Okay. Literally, my computer has gone crazy. Okay, let's move on to the last section of this lecture then. 1976. what I'm going to suggest to you now is that basically punk comes out of, is a type of cultural response to the seeming type of political and economic anarchy in the UK. That punk is the cultural expression of what many people felt was the political and economic disintegration of the post-war system, social democratic system. So when the Sex Pistols sang in God Save the Queen, which you remember came out for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, not the coronation, that would have been remarkable, came out for the Silver Jubilee celebrations of Queen Elizabeth II in 1977, and they sang, you know, No Future in England's Dreaming. That was how many people felt. Not just young people, but many people felt that there was no future in the UK. It's for that reason that people began to emigrate again in very large numbers out of the country. Okay? But critically, I'm going to suggest to you that what punk did was express the widespread disillusionment. Well, not a widespread disillusionment, but it expressed a key set of criticism about that post-war social democratic settlement. In the first point, it was a critique of the welfare state, because, you know, many people were increasingly beginning to be young people unable to get jobs. Okay, so the central thing that the welfare state was supposed to promise, full employment, was becoming increasingly not the case in the 70s. Remember, unemployment wavers between 1 million and 1.5 million. Okay. Second thing was that the great delivery of affluence by welfare capitalism seemed very, very uneven. Okay, and here in many ways punk picks up on the critiques of those radical strands in the 1960s that says, look, you have all of these universal promises that affluence is going to be everywhere, but it just isn't. Okay, and so therefore one of the things that punk does is say, look, we can't afford to go out and buy fancy clothing. We are going to make stuff up ourselves. Okay, we're not going to be dictated to by commercial record companies. We're going to create our own record companies and do our own things. And then finally, of course, there was, as I said to you last week, a deep, burning, visceral hatred of hippies and the so-called opting out of society that they, many people in the punk movement had felt that they had done with all their silly alternative lifestyles. It's no coincidence that at the beginning of that clip, the clip in the beginning of the class, John Lydon is shouting out, "We're not fucking Woodstock." Yeah, it's like he's absolutely saying, you know, this is something new. This is not just another form of hippie alternative stuff. Now, the other thing that punk has often been taken to represent is a revolt of the white working class. Okay? One of the reasons why the Clash sing White Riot is because punk is seen by many people to represent the detritus of the white working class, feeling embittered by the arrival of Commonwealth immigrants. Okay? And so for many people, all of the Nazi iconography that people in the punk movement used was equated with this type of white